That's a band called Letters to Cleo and a song called Let's Get High. And whether you call it altering your consciousness or just getting high, that's what most people I know call it. The Book of Highs, 255 Ways to Alter Your Consciousness Without Drugs by author EDWARD ROSENFELD, shows there is a bunch of ways to get high that you never have to flush down the toilet. Dr. Andrew Weil did the introduction to the book, and a whole new generation of people are going to find a lot of legal ways to push their minds to an experimental realm. Edward, it is great to have you on the show.
Allan, I'm so pleased to be talking with you.
Wow, it's a great book, and it's amazing to me that we're at this point in history, and I don't want to get into a marijuana discussion, legalization, but we're at this point in history. There seems to be an acceptance. It's a part of life. I don't know if it was there the first time you wrote the book. Talk about the differences and the updates.
Well, just to cover the updates very briefly, most of the updates are in the final section of the book, which is devices and machines, and they come about because of advances in computing technology, things like augmented and virtual reality. There was no electronic dance music back in the 70s. But I actually started writing the book in the late 60s because a lot of people who had never taken any drugs were writing laws outlawing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminded me of the prohibition of alcohol, which was a failure. And I was just so discouraged by the fact that they were trying to legislate consciousness. And I thought, you can't outlaw consciousness. And I was very fortunate in the late 60s and the early 70s that there was a great deal of scholarly literature looking at the ways in which people alter their states of awareness. So I capitalized on that earlier research, did my own research, and decided to put together like a little mini encyclopedia, a compendium of several hundred ways, as something that had to do with law enforcement, the legal and judicial systems, incarceration. And now those attitudes are starting to change, certainly with marijuana, and perhaps in terms of the research that's recently been allowed with some of the psychedelic drugs to treat people who are in late stages of terminal diseases and the depression that they experience. And so times are changing.
Times are changing, and there are so many great ideas in this book, and some of them might sound a little strange, but they're fascinating. And let me just pick a couple of random. I'm going to go more than a couple out of the 255? Wow.
That's it.
That's it. All right, let's talk about the act of continuous singing. People just singing continuously. Talk about that high.
Well, there's several highs in the book that are based on the notion of repetition. I mentioned electronic dance music earlier.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a repetition of beats. And continuous singing is another form of repetition. And continuous singing, you get into a state that's different than just normal singing if you continue to sing and sing and sing. It's the same thing with exposing yourself to different sounds that are repetitive, different words that are repetitive. The notion of repetition, chanting, these are all states that alter our awareness and change our experience of our lives.
This is interesting. Zen Power Yell.
The Zen. I've got two Zen yells in the book. One is really not a yell. It's the Zen morning laugh, and then there's the Zen Power Yell. The Zen morning laugh, you get up in the morning and laugh hysterically for a few minutes, and when you think you're through, you laugh some more. And it really sets up the day. The Zen Power Yell is a way to focus your attention on your power. And roaring like a lion is something you can do to do the Zen Power Yell.
It's interesting. As far as the laughter, I guess you don't have to. What if you don't really think anything is funny? Does it matter, or is it just the physical act of laughing?
I think it's the physical act of laughing, and overcoming the resistance that you feel that you don't want to keep laughing is what gets you into that altered state.
Oh, that's interesting.
When you keep laughing and push forward through it.
Yeah. What is body chanting?
Oh, that was something that was done to me back in the early 70s by Bernie Aronson. Well, you know about chanting from the Hare Krishna people and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he placed speakers on different parts of my body and played chants into different parts of my body. And I left his office just as I was high. I was turned on. It was quite extraordinary. And it never caught on. And I've lost track of Bernie. I'm not sure he's still alive. But it was one of the most interesting experiences when I was researching the book. One of the best of the ways of highs that I found to get high.
You know, it's interesting. This is probably not really considered a high. It's I don't know. But whenever I have a guest on the show, and I've been doing my show or a show similar to this for, 35 years plus. And on the big guests, the big names, the celebrity guests, the high-profile guests, I get very nervous. And most of my career, except in the early days, I can cover that up pretty good. Really a lot of intense work before it, and you're all keyed up, and it's not a pleasant experience. But once I'm on the air, and once the show is rolling, that all goes away. And all of a sudden, it's like it's a high. It's a high of super consciousness, not altered, really. Would that fit in this?
Absolutely. And what you're talking about is what many people experience when they do physical exercise or when they approach different kinds of athletic sports and so forth. They get into the flow. That's what you get into. You get into the flow when you're in that state. When you're doing your interviews. Mm-hmm. And, people have commented to me they didn't know I had golf in the book. Well, some people who play golf experience it as transcendent. And it's that sense of flow, that sense that we're not going to be distracted by anything. We're totally focused on what we're doing. And it makes a big difference to us when we're that focused.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about golf. What is character analysis? Is that what that is?
Oh, character analysis was invented by one of the disciples of Freud, Wilhelm Reich, and what he was looking at in our personalities.
You were cut off there. The last 10 seconds was cut off. I think you got a call waiting thing that cut you off. Just repeat the last 10.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
What I was saying was character analysis was Wilhelm Reich, a disciple of Freud, who was looking at when we develop our personality, we develop certain characterological traits, certain things that we do repetitively, certain things that we fall into without thinking about them. And in his character analysis, what he wanted to do was to help his patients break through the character traits that were inhibiting them.
You know, it's interesting. In fact, I think I've had you on my show before. Did you ever work with a group that was in Charlotte, North Carolina, somewhere in the 90s that dealt with the research into psychedelics? Seems like your name rings a bell. You were one of the experts or something, but maybe not.
I don't think so, Alan.
Okay. Well, who we're talking to, if you're just tuning in, and I've been looking forward to this. This is a topic that I find fascinating, always did. It's called The Book of Highs, 255 Ways to Alter Your Consciousness Without Drugs by EDWARD ROSENFELD. And let me give you his website. There is a website on the book. What is? I had it right in front of me. What's the name of what's the website again?
The website is bookofhighs.com, bookofhighs.com. And there's a lot of ancillary and additional material on the website, including social media posts, connection to our YouTube channel, a Spotify playlist. We've got a lot of stuff at the website.
Good stuff.
And it's pretty entertaining.
Good stuff. Yes, it is. The book is great. It's just a fun book to read, very colorful. And let's talk a little bit about, as far as the 60s are concerned, the outlawing of psychedelics in the 60s, which, looking back, I don't know if people would even believe. It's so bizarre what was going on back then as far as law enforcement.
People have bad trips. So many of your listeners may not remember or even know who Art Linkletter was. But at the time, he was a very, very well-known personality, and his daughter had a bad trip, and unfortunately, she committed suicide.
Right.
And so he spoke out vigorously about psychedelics. And when Richard Nixon became president, he started the war on drugs, and all of these different laws were introduced saying that psychedelics were bad. They were Schedule I, absolutely no use for them. And it's really only in the last 5 or 6 years that qualified psychiatric and medical researchers have been able to start once again to experiment with psychedelics, especially with people with terminal illness, to see if it can help deal with their anxieties and depression about the onset of death. And it's been very successful research to date.
When I was a kid, I remember hearing on the news that Nixon was going to put together a panel of experts who were going to decide whether marijuana should be legalized and was it really that bad or that dangerous. And they had all different kinds of experts from left and right. Well, they came to the conclusion that no, it's not as bad. The laws should be changed, and Nixon ignored it. That blew my mind.
Who knew?
Yeah, unbelievable. What are some of your favorite highs out of the book? Your personal ones.
Well, the very first entry in the book is concentration. And I think being able to focus your awareness, being able to be aware of your own consciousness and what you're doing with it, and being able to let go of some of the things that might distract you from taking advantage of some of the other highs described, that's one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites, and I get to plug my wife, who's a couples psychotherapist, is loving. And many of us, most of us, have had the experience of falling in love. What an altered state.
Yeah.
I mean, just thinking about talking to your loved one on the phone can change your whole body chemistry and change all the chemical and electrical systems in your brain. And then once you're together with your beloved, wow,
Yeah.
Nothing makes a difference besides what's happening between you and your beloved.
And when you're falling...
So that's, again, one
of your favorites. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to add and let you continue. When you're falling in love, when you meet someone that you just say, wow, this is the person, everything changes. You can lose weight. You can discipline yourself to do things you couldn't do before. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And it's a real altered state of awareness.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
then there's another kind of love, the longer-lasting love, attachment love, a calmer but an equally powerful kind of love that people in long-term relationships often experience.
Yeah.
And that, too, is an alteration of consciousness.
Interesting. Now, we talked about repetition, and you mentioned virtual reality, and there's so much virtual reality gadgets. You can find them almost at the dollar store now, these goggles and stuff. How, you call that a high? Certainly you must.
Well, not only is it a high, but it's an example of one of the things that I like to talk about the different highs in the book. Because some things like watching your breathing, paying attention to your inhalations and exhalations, that's not going to harm you or harm anyone else. Virtual reality has a caveat involved in it. I spoke to somebody just last night who put on virtual reality gear at an automobile show here in New York City the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And in virtual reality, he was flying as if he were a drone over a landscape. Well, he got motion sickness, and he got nauseous.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, some people don't experience that, but some people do. And it's a real concern in the VR, the virtual reality community, about how to deal with people's sense of motion sickness. Because you're simulating motion, and those simulations are very realistic. That's why they call it virtual reality, because it seems real.
Well, Edward,
I'll give another example.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're almost out of time, and I want to give you all the time. Go ahead.
I was just going to talk about fire walking. People can be instructed in fire walking and walk over the coals, no burns, they feel exhilarated. Other people get the instruction and their feet get burned.
Yeah.
So you really have to be careful. You really have to be considerate about what you're doing.
Absolutely. Edward Rosenfeld, remember my name, Allan Handelman, because I want to have you back. This is a fun topic, a great book, and we're just scratching the surface. The book is called The Book of Highs, 255 Ways to Alter Your Consciousness Without Drugs. Ed, it was great talking to you. Thanks for being on the Allan Handelman Show.
What a pleasure, Alan. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking to you again.
Absolutely.